It's a death-defying life I lead. I take my chances. I die for living in the movies and TV.
Hey there, John Wise here with Curt Rierson. You guys might have seen him in some other videos, and he also helps me do some editing of videos along with Michelle that works with Curt. So I've been getting some help lately on some of these videos, and a video I've thought about doing for a while is one of the most common questions. The title of this video, if you clicked on it, people ask, like, what is a ghost town? Or why did you call that place a ghost town? Because there might be people there.
Right.
Or what is a ghost town? Or, you know, if it's a community, how can it be called a ghost town if it's got people or this one doesn't have people? So I thought we'd make a video and talk about it and just have a conversation about what is a ghost town.
What is a ghost town? Well, I think my first introduction to a ghost town was I was 6, and I was watching the Brady Bunch, and it was their trip to the Grand Canyon, and they got stopped in a ghost town, and some fiend robbed their car, and yeah, they were stuck in a ghost town. So I thought that was the most horrible place you could be. But obviously, it's not the real ghost town. But
and people, you know, there's so many references in culture about ghost towns.
Yeah.
Songs, television shows, movies. And so it's an interesting term that I don't know if people have really defined, because it really doesn't have a specific definition.
Right.
It's just a term like, oh, that place looks like a ghost town.
but there are different degrees and types, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I've got a bunch of books. I just brought a few here. And when I first came to Kansas, I bought this book called Ghost Towns of Kansas by Daniel Fitzgerald. And this was the way I learned about Kansas, because I'm from Ohio. I didn't really know much about Kansas. I thought I'd get a local book, and this was the book I bought.
Nice.
And I thought, well, this is interesting to learn because you learn about the history of the state. And one of the things I remember reading, and he has his definition of what is a ghost town. So this guy's an expert. There's all these books of different states, and I thought I would show you what Daniel Fitzgerald says. He says, my definition of a ghost town is a town that has disappeared completely or is only a shadowy remnant of what it once was. Some of these communities still have life, although nothing to compare with the prosperity they enjoyed in their heyday. So, and he's written like 6 of these, and I think I got 4 of them. They're really awesome if you like ghost town stuff, because there were something like 6,000 Kansas ghost towns, extinct towns, dead towns, whatever you want to call them, throughout history, because Kansas has this, you know, history of people exploring to the west and trying to set up places. And we can talk about why a ghost town happens or how it becomes a ghost town. But so it's fascinating to kind of learn about that. And he's way more of an expert than I am. And so, but the one thing that he talks about in there is it's a shadowy remnant. That's a very vague definition. So to me, there's a bunch of different types of places that could be, you know, one of those shadowy remnants. I think there's 8 different types, and maybe 9. I guess the first one we could get out of the way is if it has ghosts in it.
Yes. Seems the most logical one. Yeah.
So that's not a ghost town.
No.
That's not what we consider a ghost town. It could be a fun way to talk about something like Theoros's Bridge.
Yeah.
You know, it's the spooky season.
It's a spooky
So, but yeah, so that's probably not what we consider ghost town. Although people I know early on when I did videos, they thought that's what it meant. They thought that it was a haunted town, but that's generally not what. But I guess it could be if you find somewhere that's a ghost town, but that's not usually what people refer to as ghost town. Probably the most common one is that you would think of it as like an abandoned place. It's got like nowhere, like Pitcher, Oklahoma. So
good example.
You know, there's some of those that have buildings, but no people left, right? There's places that there's literally nothing left. So they might have been a town and they moved, or all the buildings been demolished. Maybe there's a cemetery. That's often the only thing left, because those are things that you really can't just move.
Pick up. Yeah.
And you'll go find somewhere, and it was like, well, there's people here in the cemetery, and where are all the there's no town. And so that's a clue often. One that is interesting that I was reading about in one of these books was paper towns. And that's like a town that never existed, but it was an idea or it was like a scheme.
Yeah.
So there'd be people that would try to get people to buy land. You know, starting these towns, it was a moneymaker back in the day, you know?
Yeah.
And especially in Kansas, they would try to go to a place where maybe the railroad would come through and then, you know, try to get people to buy land. They would have a newspaper. That would be something that they would do.
In marketing.
Yeah, exactly. There wasn't television studios yet,
Right.
so or commercials. So the only way they could do it was a newspaper. And they talk about come to Western Kansas. It's lush green
Oasis.
oasis. They have pictures of, you know, churches and buildings, and somebody would out east would be like, "Oh, I've never been to Kansas or Colorado or Montana." This sound. Kevin Costner made a movie called Horizon, where that's kind of what the idea is. And,
Okay.
and Horizon was the name of this town that never really was anything. But there was one in Kansas called Chicago Heights, and it was a scheme to get people's money, and they would buy. They'd have to invest in it before they moved out there, and a guy just took the money. And
The ultimate
you know,
timeshare scam.
yeah.
Jeez.
So that's another one. You know, a couple other ones are places that would have had like a post office, but then no longer has a post office. Now, some people would say, well, if there's people there, why is it a ghost town? Well, it's because it's a remnant, like Daniel Fitzgerald said. It's a remnant of what it used to be. If it had a post office and now it doesn't, there's a reason. And you know, and it doesn't anymore. Anything that's like unincorporated could be a ghost town because it is probably was a bigger place and just is not incorporated anymore. And then I'd say another way, you know, there's places like Cairo, Illinois, that if you guys remember watching that video, it was this really abandoned city that had like 20,000 people, and now it's like 1,500. People would call that a ghost town too, even though there's like 1,500 people living there.
Yeah.
And it's what would that be? 80 to 90% of their population gone, and 80 to 90% of the buildings are abandoned. So you're driving around, and it's as haunted as feeling as you could imagine. Generally, people would say it's a ghost town, but then people might argue, well, there's 1,500 people living there. Well, that's where the shadowy remnant that Daniel Fitzgerald talks about is kind of comes in. So I think of anything that's lost 3/4 of its population, or it's something a quarter of its size. So when I'm looking at doing videos, if there's population, if it had 500 people and now it's down to 100, it's if it's not a ghost town, it's heading that way for sure. So to me, that's kind of the categories of that. And maybe one last one that could be is like a historic community that is being restored or something, or kind of maintained, but there hardly isn't anybody living there anymore. Kaskaskia, Illinois would be one that was like the capital of the territory, and now there's like 20 people living there, and they have all these historic buildings. So it's a town technically, but it's instead of 15,000 people, there's 20. So I don't think it has to have 0 people to be a ghost town. So anyways, that's my definition. What do you think of those?
I think, well, especially like areas where, and I think back then the county seats changed so much, you know, so it was like, you know, a game of checkers, you know, just, you know, one, it succeeded to the other. So, and I agree. I think, you know, I grew up in, you know, small town Kansas, and it's, at the time, I think it was an oil town for a long time, and then the population kind of waned, and then, you know, cattle kind of came back in the picture. And so it really wasn't a true ghost town, but I could see towns around it like that, where like the post office went away, you know, or it was consolidated with this small town next to it, you know. So, so in my young 50 years, I've seen, you know, shadowy figures of towns like that. But yeah, it is, it's kind of sad, you know, to see some of that, especially when it's agriculture and stuff like that. That is, you know, that was the deciding factor that they took it away. Like the railroad went away, so they couldn't, you know, haul cattle there anymore. So it is kind of interesting and kind of sad to see that. So,
you know, the railroad, especially out here, was so significant. People would have a town. Well, they would go out in the middle of Kansas, think, we're going to set up town and then convince the railroad to come through here.
Mhm.
And there was probably some shenanigans going on to try to get the town to go there,
Oh yeah.
and or the railroad. And then if it didn't, then they had to either move their town to where the railroad was, maybe even join another town, or just leave their town, or try to make the best of it in the middle of nowhere, which if there's no road or railroad, is pretty much in the 1800s impossible to grow.
Oh yeah. And what a gamble too. If you're a homesteader, you set up it's like everything you have is put in this plot, and like, nope, there's no sustenance anymore.
The railroad's going 2 miles north.
Yep, pick it up. So yeah.
You know, it's interesting, like Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma. So Kansas has all those like with the railroad.
Mm-hmm.
Colorado has so many with like mining
Yeah.
that are ghost towns because they were boom, a big boom. And then when the mining's done, everybody leaves. There's nothing else to do there.
Yep.
And then kind of in a similar way with Oklahoma is the oil booms. So you have all these towns that exploded overnight, and some in Kansas too, but they exploded overnight. It's so huge, and then it's nothing anymore. And picture Oklahoma was a mining place, but everybody had to leave because they were getting poisoned to death with the contamination in the water.
Yeah.
But
that's a good point though. I mean, we talk about the economic reasons why some fail, but like the natural disaster or natural environment reasons why it just can't sustain a town.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen a lot of those.
Yeah. You read a lot about a tornado wiping out a town. Fires were a big problem.
Yeah.
Especially when everything was built of wood back in the day, and a fire could take out a town. And I guess that's kind of a natural. Maybe it wasn't, depending on
if you had
who set the fire or where the fire came from.
Yeah.
But the other one I was going to mention was you started talking about the county seat situation, and there were all these battles too. One reason there were ghost towns were because the counties were getting set up, and I've seen this so much in Kansas and even Nebraska, a lot of places where they'd be getting their town set up, the county was getting organized, and different people were trying to get the county seat, and they would have a vote, and if you didn't win the county seat, you were pretty much out of luck.
Yeah.
And you had to generally move, or they might have the county seat for a temporary period of time for a couple of years, and they have another vote. They move it over here because it's in a better location, and then those towns are gone. Other interesting old people don't think about in Kansas and other places is that there were a lot of towns originally on the river that aren't there anymore either, because the way people traveled was by boat.
Yeah.
And so up in like Kansas City, up along in the Missouri River, up that way, there were a lot of cool towns up there, and now they're ghost towns and very small, beautiful areas along the river. So, and then the other major one is when the highway system bypasses these towns. Route 66 is the famous one.
Yep.
And if it's the 100th anniversary coming up of Route 66, and it's interesting driving any part of that because you see what happened, what would have been the 1970s when they started building the expressways, the interstates. And that's, 50 years ago. And, just kind of like the railroad in a different way.
Right.
Those towns, need to stop at the gas station or go to the store there or stay in a hotel when you got the convenience of driving 80 miles an hour, and you got every gas station that you need to, and Holiday Inns and everything like that. So mom and pop, didn't need it anymore. But, I always think about like, how could these towns make a comeback?
Yeah. And I was going to ask you about that because I noticed like in some of your recent ones of the East Coast, like the population and the census, like from the 50s, was increasing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because of the proximity to the new highway system that was built, and they were able to get to and from like Washington, D.C. to this small place in Virginia or whatever.
There's a lot. And I think that if you're in the middle of nowhere, ghost town, I think it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
For a while, at least, until we have if we can teleport ourselves to
drones,
aviation. Like until that happens, I think it's going to be tough. But if you're a place that's not too far from a reasonably decent sized population, I think there's a yearning for people to get out of a city a lot, and it's usually less expensive. It's tough. Things are getting tougher these days economically. and buying a house is harder for, you hear about that kind of stuff, but it's less expensive in the town. And one of the reasons those towns got smaller was because jobs left, but now people can maybe start working remotely, and the jobs, maybe it's not as important to be in the city. And my choice, as I've gotten older, traffic, I don't want to be around the traffic. I don't want to be around the hustle and bustle. Man, if I can have a more relaxed environment to live, and especially if you got a family. I grew up in a small town area, so I know what that's like. And I've lived in a city, so I know what that's like. I would certainly, if I had a family, I'd like the convenience of a city. I'd like to go to a concert, or I'd like to go to a show or whatever. But I also really enjoy the peace and quiet as I get older.
We were just in Anthony, Kansas last week, which is southwest of Wichita. And initially it was agriculture and cattle, but of course that kind of waned. But now Anthony's kind of booming again. And one of the big selling points is, hey, you want to work remotely? Come here and enjoy all this beautiful, acreage and scenery. And it's working. It's like, okay, I'll move to Anthony, Kansas.
Yeah.
So
there's actually, it never was a ghost town, but it was just lost population, but maybe it's come back up, and you see a lot of those places. Living here in Wichita, you hear about like Halstead, Caldwell and Anthony. Those are places that are close, and it's people wanting to leave Wichita or, move into the area that's less expensive. Those are probably, but there are ghost towns even within cities, because like, you take the city, it wasn't near as big.
Right.
There were other little communities around it, and then they got totally engulfed and annexed into the city.
Yep.
So it's interesting to find, it'll be like some park, like we're here at Riverside Park, which is this used to be a racetrack around here, believe it or not. It's an 800-meter loop. People come out here and run all the time. But it would be like a place like this. You go to a town or a city, like a major city, and you're like, well, from 1850 to 1870, there was a town right here.
Yep.
And because it was 2 miles from the city. And now it's just all one big city. So there's ghost towns within cities, that's an interesting one.
Because there's so many different schools. I mean, within like miles of each other, and so you can still see remnants in the footprints of the schools in some of these places. But yeah, definitely gone.
Well, that's our conversation about what is a ghost town. Do you agree? Disagree? Put in your comments of what you think a ghost town is. I like to have a broad definition, because it's a interesting way to look at a place that's used to be much more, and like, why did it lose its population? Why is it this instead of what it used to be? It was somebody's grand idea. I was just in a town called Rome, Kansas, and I'm guarantee you when they built Rome, not in a day, that they were hoping for more, but there's not much left anymore.
E2 fruit tie.
So anyways, thanks. Hope you enjoyed this. If you have any other topics you want us to talk about, let us know, and we'll talk about it some more. So right. We'll see you and you down the back road.
I die for living in the movies and TV, but the hardest thing I ever do is watch my leading ladies kiss some other guy while I'm bandaging my knee. I might fall from a tall building, I might roll a brand new